It was just after midday on Sunday, March 1st, 2026, when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran released a statement that stunned military analysts, world leaders, and ordinary people watching the news from their living rooms. The statement was short, direct, and explosive. Iran's IRGC declared that its forces had successfully struck the USS Abraham Lincoln, an American Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, with 4 ballistic missiles. The carrier, sitting somewhere in the Persian Gulf as part of the largest U.S. naval deployment in the Middle East in over 2 decades, had been hit, Iran claimed. The land and sea, the IRGC added in its characteristic rhetoric, would increasingly become the graveyard of what it called the terrorist aggressors. For a moment, the world held its breath. The USS Abraham Lincoln is not just any ship, it is one of the most powerful and expensive warships ever built by human hands. At 333 meters long and capable of carrying roughly 65 aircraft and thousands of personnel, the carrier weighs close to 100,000 tons when fully loaded. It is a floating airbase, a symbol of American military supremacy, and a message to every adversary in the world about the reach and scale of American power. Its estimated value is $13 billion. To strike it, to successfully land a ballistic missile on its hull, would be one of the most significant military events in modern history, or yes, arguably since the sinking of the Belgrano during the 1982 Falklands War, or the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. A successful hit on the Lincoln would rewrite every military calculation in the region and beyond, which is exactly why the world paid such close attention to what came next. Within minutes of Iran's statement going public, the U.S. Central Command, known as CENTCOM, responded on the social media platform X with a message that was unusually blunt for a military command. The statement read, "The Lincoln was not hit. The missiles launched didn't even come close." CENTCOM went further, adding pointedly that Lincoln continued to launch aircraft in support of its campaign to eliminate threats from the Iranian regime. The message was clear. Iran was lying, the carrier was fine, and the war was continuing. So who was telling the truth? And why did this moment matter so much? To understand the full weight of what happened on that Sunday afternoon, you have to go back 48 hours, back to the pre-dawn darkness of Saturday, February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. In a massive coordinated campaign that struck 24 Iranian provinces simultaneously, American and Israeli forces hit IRGC command centers, missile production facilities, air defense systems, nuclear infrastructure, and, most shockingly, the personal compound of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in his office at approximately 5 in the morning Tehran time. It was the largest U.S. military operation in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Iran had been warning for years that if it were attacked, it would respond by striking American military bases and assets across the entire region. Those warnings were not empty. The morning after Operation Epic Fury began, Iran made good on them. Iran launched waves of missiles and drones at Israel and towards several military bases in the Middle East where U.S. forces operate. Bahrain, Kuwait, Cyprus, and the UAE all reported incoming strikes. Authorities in Dubai confirmed that 2 people were injured when debris from intercepted drones fell into the courtyards of 2 homes. In Abu Dhabi, a woman and her child were injured by debris from an intercepted drone falling onto one of the buildings of the Etihad Towers complex. Even Cyprus was targeted. UK Defense Secretary John Haley said that 2 missiles were fired from Iran towards Cyprus, describing the attacks as showing how indiscriminate Iranian missile strikes were becoming. And then came the claim about Lincoln. According to the statement released by the IRGC's Public Relations Office, the USS Abraham Lincoln was struck by 4 ballistic missiles as part of what it called Operation True Promise 4, named in sequence after Iran's earlier retaliatory missile campaigns against Israel and U.S. targets in 2024 and 2025. The IRGC stated that this attack was carried out following a series of operations by Iran's armed forces against targets associated with the U.S. and Israel, and warned that its forces had entered what it described as a new phase of military conflict. The language was confident, declarative, and delivered with the kind of certainty that implied Iran wanted the world to believe it had crossed a line no country had crossed in decades, striking a U.S. supercarrier in open water. Abraham Lincoln had been in the Gulf for weeks before the war began. The carrier was sent to the Gulf towards the end of January as part of what President Donald Trump called an armada move to the region just in case, as tensions spiked over Iran's brutal crackdown on protesters who had been filling the streets of Tehran, Isfahan, Lebanon, and dozens of other Iranian cities since late December 2025. The ship was not there by accident. It was there as a deterrent, a show of force, a message to Tehran that the United States was watching and was ready. The Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was one of 2 U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups deployed to the region alongside the Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group as part of the largest buildup of U.S. firepower in the Middle East in a generation. A Nimitz-class carrier like the Lincoln does not travel alone. It moves as part of a strike group, a small fleet of warships designed specifically to protect it. The strike group includes 3 destroyers loaded with Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles and is normally accompanied by a nuclear-powered submarine that fires the same weapon. The carrier itself is equipped with multiple layers of missile defense systems. Getting a ballistic missile through all of those defenses, past all of those warships, and landing it on the deck of a vessel moving through open water is, according to most military analysts, extraordinarily difficult. Some say it is close to impossible with current Iranian missile technology, despite how advanced that technology has become in recent years. The U.S. military called Iran's claim a lie. CENTCOM's response left no room for ambiguity or diplomatic softening. The Lincoln, the command said, had not been hit. The missiles had not come close. And crucially, the carrier was still fully operational, still launching aircraft, still projecting force, still supporting the ongoing campaign against Iran. U.S. B-2 stealth bombers had struck Iran's hardened ballistic missile infrastructure with 2,000-pound bombs the night before, and operations were continuing without interruption. But Iran's claim, true or not, served a purpose. It was a message directed not just at Washington and Jerusalem, but at the Iranian people, at the Arab world watching nervously, and at every government on the planet reassessing its relationship with American military dominance. Iran was saying, we are fighting back. We are not defeated. We struck the symbol of American naval power in our own waters. Whether the missiles hit or not almost becomes secondary to the declaration of intent. This is a pattern Iran has used before. Iran's National Security Council had advised residents to leave Tehran amid fears of further escalation, a sign that Iran's own leadership knew more strikes were coming. But at the same time, the IRGC was feeding its own population and its allied networks around the region a narrative of resistance and retaliation. Hezbollah in Lebanon had already fired rockets at Israel in revenge for Khamenei's killing. The Houthis in Yemen were launching drones and missiles into the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The IRGC said all U.S. assets throughout the region were considered legitimate targets, and it meant it. Whether you believe the Lincoln was hit or not, Iran was showing it was willing to try. Meanwhile, the human cost on all sides was mounting rapidly. The Pentagon announced that 3 U.S. military members were killed in action and 5 seriously wounded in the Iran operation, the first American combat casualties of the conflict to be officially confirmed. On the Iranian side, at least 201 people had been killed and more than 700 injured across Iran, according to the Iranian Red Crescent Society. And that was only within the first day. In Israel, a missile struck a synagogue in the town of Beit Shemesh, killing 9 people and injuring 45. The deadliest single attack on Israel since the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran began. The Beit Shemesh missile was followed by reports of repeated barrages across Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, with sirens sounding continuously through the night. Trump announced on Sunday that 9 Iranian naval ships had been destroyed and sunk as part of ongoing combat operations. He wrote that Iran's naval headquarters had been largely destroyed in a separate attack and warned that the rest of Iran's fleet would soon be at the bottom of the sea. The U.S. was striking back at Iran's ability to wage naval warfare at the same time as it was denying Iran's claim to have struck the Lincoln, a 2-track message that said both. You missed. And here's what happens to those who try. The story of the 4 missiles fired at Abraham Lincoln captures in concentrated form everything that is now defining this war. It is a war of facts and counterfacts, of claims and denials, of propaganda as strategy alongside actual combat. It is a war in which a country that has lost its supreme leader, had its military infrastructure torn apart, and is watching its currency collapse is still firing back with everything it has. And it is a war in which the United States, operating the most powerful naval strike force seen in this region since 2003, is insisting it cannot be touched, while 3 of its soldiers are already confirmed dead. Whether Iran's 4 ballistic missiles struck the Lincoln's hull or vanished harmlessly into the Gulf waters, the moment tells us something profound about where this conflict is headed. Iran is not surrendering. It is not suing for peace. It is not waiting for a ceasefire to be negotiated. It is firing at the most expensive, most visible, most symbolic target it can identify in the waters around it, and telling the world it scored a hit. The United States is saying Iran missed. The truth somewhere between those 2 positions is still being written. 1 missile, 1 denial, 1 burning ship at a time.